To learn to write a melody, we're going to start with a basic 4-chord progression over 4 bars, like we did in the previous lesson. For my song, I've created a chord progression that goes DFA, FAC, CEG, and GBD, and you'll see I have the A and the G chord in inversions. So I've got some reasonable voice leading here. You'll see there's a bit of a leap when it loops back around from the G to the D, but that's okay because I like kind of the descending feel of this. Also, you'll notice that the bass progression comes up to this G here while the accompaniment part goes down. When it goes from this G back to the D, the bass is going down while the accompaniment is going up. That's good voice leading right there because they're moving in what we call contrapuntal motion or counterpoint, meaning while the bass is going down, the accompaniment is going up. That allows us to maintain that sense of being in the same range. If I had had this bass note all the way down in the G0 here and it jumped up at the same time the accompaniment did, it would be more jarring. We would constantly have our attention drawn to it, which isn't what you want when your song gets going. So I'm going to start by replicating this chord progression for 16 bars. We're going to try to build a 16-bar melody here, or at least the beginnings of it, today. Okay, so what I've done is taken a screenshot of the first 8 measures of my song here, and I'm going to start to draw in my phrases. Again, we're going for 2-bar phrases, so for 8 bars, we should have 4 phrases. So these first 2 bars are the length of my first phrase, and I'm going to look at my accompaniment and my bass parts in order to inform my decisions around the melody. My melody needs to be up between C4 and C5. In this case, I have a fairly high accompaniment part. You see that right here? Now, I may decide that's too high, and I may grab this top voice in the accompaniment and knock it down an octave. But right now, this is what we have, so let's work with it. We should end up with a fairly high melody in this song. I'm going to be looking at the motion of the bass in the accompaniment and try to be contrapuntal to that, move in opposite directions with the melody. Now, as I go to draw my melodic phrase, there's actually only a couple options I can select from. One is I either stay flat. 2 is I start high and go low. 3, I go low to high. 4, I do some sort of arch. And 5, I do some sort of U. So really there's only 5 different main patterns in a melody. I'm going to pick one of those patterns that I think might work well with this. If I went from low to high, it exactly mirrors the bass line. It won't stand out as much. If I simply go high to low, it'll sound like the accompaniment part, maybe not stand out as much. So I think I'm going to try some sort of U or arch option that will be contrapuntal to the downward motion in my accompaniment and the upward motion in my bass. So I think I'll do a little U shape like this. That's the basis for getting started. It was that simple. We just picked one of the 5 shapes based on what we were seeing down below. Now I have to pick my start note, and the start note is important. My first chord is a D, so that means my start note needs to be in that D chord. I also have to pick my start location. So I know I'm going to pick this note, or this note right here. D, F, or A to start from. Part of the decision is, am I going to run into this A down here? So I probably want to leave a little bit of space. So I'm thinking what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with this F note right here. So I'm going to grab my arch and I'm going to move it over to F. And now I get to decide on the start time. Do I want to start right at the beginning of the bar, all the way at the end, or somewhere in between? Well, again, with the idea of counterpoint, if my accompaniment part and my bass part are hitting right on the downbeat, if I want my melody to pop out, a great idea is to start it not on that downbeat. So what I'll do is I'll delay it a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and delay it to the middle of the measure right there. So now I've picked my start note and my start time. I'm starting on measure 1, beat 2. And I think at this point I will pick my end time. When do I want this phrase to end? If I want it to end in such a way that it sounds conclusive, I probably want it to end on one of the notes that are in the next chord, the chord that it's over. So my first chord was DFA. My second chord is FAC. So good notes for it to end on in the second chord are F, A, and C. Now you'll see when I've drawn my arch here that I'm nowhere near a C. I am close to an A and I'm close to an F. If I were to stay on F, that would make my arch perfectly flat here, which is one option. But I think what I'd like to do is maybe aim up here for this A, so I'm a little bit higher. So I've picked my end note, is going to be A. Now I need to pick the end time, which I'll go ahead and select beat 3 of measure 2. Now I want to start by drawing in a couple of those notes. So I'm going to start by putting in quarter notes on that F and that A. Now I've got my first and last notes, and really all I need to do is add the extra notes on my line in between. Let's see what happens. When I drew each of these quarter note notes in, you'll see that I had 2 when I got up here to the B, which almost converts that into a half note. We'll take a listen to that and see how that sounds. So I'm going to go over to Logic now. I'm going to put my notes in just like this because I can't draw all these lines on top of Logic. To get those notes in on the lead region in Logic, I need to select just it. I'll enter this first note on F, and then I can go back and select all the regions to see it in relationship to the others. So I'm just going to mirror my pattern that I had drawn. Let's take a listen to that now. I might pick a different lead sound, so I'm going to go ahead and do that in Serum here. Now, the sounds you pick are really important. It'll make a big difference in how it sounds. So it's sort of important to pick the sounds early on when you're doing your melody. I'm going to go into leads. We'll just start with a little Steve Aoki, huh? Okay, so I've picked a lead sound now. The reason I was saying it was important to go pick a lead sound is the lead sound I have actually has quite a bit of motion in it. Back in the day when you would have had to create motion by having additional notes, here we can use filters and sweeps inside the synthesized sound to create some interest. And in fact, in this case, it almost sounds like 2/8 notes for every quarter note we've put in. So I don't want to go start building some sort of melody on a cheesy sound and then add a synth sound that isn't going to work with it. So here's my beautiful melody over the top of my chords. That works for me. That's basically all I want to do in this first step right now. Now I want to add a second phrase. And to do that, let's talk a little bit about phrase mapping. After listening to many, many songs in this class, I've come up with this phrase mapping pattern for you to consider. And in this, I have the idea of 3 paths. You have a red path, a green path, and a blue path. And pretty much all melodies follow one of these paths. Now, there's probably some exceptions out there, but I would say that every single melody that I've tried or tested has fit one of these patterns. The red path means you're going to play the same phrase 3 times in a row and then change it the last time. A green path means you're going to play the same phrase twice. You're going to switch to a new phrase and then either play it twice or it and go back or it and something else. But you go A, A, B. Now you might be noticing at this point that these patterns are starting to match song form patterns because it's the same idea of holding someone's attention. The third phrase is you play a pattern A, you go to B, but that means you need to quickly go back to A to reestablish A as home, and then you would go back to B or sometimes C. So we end up with kind of 3 main patterns, which is A to B, B to something, and A to something. And you'll notice that the verse chorus pattern that we're using in songs, A, B, would be a blue path. If we look at jazz and we went to A, that would be a green path. So after you've created your first phrase, A, now the choice is, are you going to play A again, or are you going to play B? And when I say play A again, it might not be exactly. It might be A prime. It might be slightly different to get the notes to fit, or it might be exact. To make my decision whether to stay on A or go to B, I'm going to look at my accompaniment and bass parts. And what I'm looking for is there a similar pattern between measure 1 and 2 that there is between 3 and 4? If there is, then an A would probably sound good again. If there's something very different going on, then a B would probably sound good. Well, it's a little confusing because my accompaniment part is moving in the same direction and looks similar going from measure 1 to measure 2 as it does from 3 to 4. My bass part, though, has a major jump in it that's different than it was in the first one, but it's still going up. With that information, I think I will stay with A because this pattern looks very similar here in measures 3 and 4 as it did in 1 and 2. So I'm going to draw the same line somewhere over here. Now, as I look at the bass line and I look at the accompaniment line, I see that there's space here and there's this sense that my melody is probably going to descend. Why is that? Because I've created more space in my accompaniment part, and also my bass part has come up. So if I'm going to be contrapuntal with that, it means my melody is going to come down. Now I need to find the start point and the start time for my second phrase. Well, I know the time is going to be at the same as the first one. So it's going to start at measure 3, beat 3. Now the starting pitch is a little trickier because I don't necessarily want to start on that F in the exact same place because the chord I'm playing down below is a C, E, G chord. And it would be wise to start with one of the notes in that chord. So if I look at the next note down from this F that is in a C chord, I get to this E note right here. And that E note is a really good spot for me to consider starting. So I'm going to try it. I'm going to drag that note there and start there. And I know that my phrase is going to end up a little higher at the end. And so I'm going to look at my end note now, which is going to be on major 4, beat 3. And I can see I'm on top of a G chord, so I want it to be a G or B or D. And I look over here, and what do you know? There's a G right there, so I can simply drag that note over to the G, and then I'm just going to keep that same pattern so that this is an A. Okay, so the A is shifted slightly. Some people might call this A prime because it's on a different note. It's not on the exact same note. If we kept A at the exact same notes, even over the top of the changing chords, it would sound more like a chorus. It would be more repetitive, and we might like that. We could compare that later. But for right now, we want to link our melody with these chords in the verse because we're telling a story part of the song. So I'm going to switch over to Logic, and we're going to enter those notes and see how they sound. And let's see how that sounds. I've got a 4-bar melody now with 2 phrases in it, and what I could probably do at this point is simply duplicate that, and I've already got the first 8 bars of my melody. Now, if I left it just like that, my melody is really A-A-A-A. If I were to do A-A-A-A for too long, it would get boring. Okay, I'm not going to play it through here for you to listen to. But somewhere in here, you'd start to get boring, and certainly if we wanted to make a 16-bar melody, you would never want to do this again. So probably we need to start making a change somewhere, and if we went A-A, and we go back and look at the melody tree now, A-A, we have a choice here. We could play another A, or we can go to B. If I go over and look at my chords again here, I can look and see if there's anything that might inform that decision. If I play another A here, I'm going to have to do something different here. I'm going to have to do a B here. If I do something different here and I do a B, it leaves more options here. I can decide what I want to do. For this song, I kind of like the mournful sound of it and the descending notes. So I think what I'll do is go back to A, and then we'll explore something different for that 4th time. So I'm going to go back to A here. I got my A starting in measure 1 and starting in measure 5. We can call this A prime because it's so similar to A. So really we've gone A, A, A. Now we really need to do something different. If we look at our melody tree right here, we're at A. Almost never would you play a 4th A. It would only be in the chorus of the song, and that would require a lot of production changes on the back end. Now, we might explore that at some point, but for right now, we want to see if we can hold interest with the melody. So let's put in a B section. Well, what is B? B is going to be something that's different than A. That's not too hard to do. If we have an arch going here, we could just pick one of the other patterns. Remember, we had low to high, we had low to high, we had high to low, we had flat, we had an arch, and we had a U. So I want to find something different than these first 3, which is the arch, and when I drew the U, it kind of looked good. So why don't I do the U? The other thing I can change is the start time and the end time of this phrase. One of the things in our music that we like the sound of is things ending and starting just a little bit early. We're going to call that syncopation, and we're going to go through and probably syncopate some of these notes later, but an idea on this last phrase is to end it early or even start it early, but we'll try just simply ending it early. So I've drawn my U there. I'm looking at my last chord and that where this melody is going to end, and I know that it's probably going to want to end on some sort of note that's in the chord. Now, when we get into more advanced classes, we'll be talking about its relationship to the scale, in this case, D minor, and where it resolved. But for right now, we're just going to link our melodies to our chords. So if I look, I could see that my U comes up and ends on that G. Now, that might not be the most exciting because I've already ended on G here. It might sound too much like this phrase here. So I'm going to try to see if I can find a different note in the G chord to end on. My options are this D down here, the G, and the B up here. I don't like any of those options, actually. I feel like the G is a little low, and I feel like the B is a little high. But since the B looks like it's the closest, why don't we try for that? So I just moved my arch up to the B. I'm a little concerned because my bass line is jumping there at the same time. But let's see what we can do with it. I'm also going to try shortening my phrase a little bit here and see if I can't have it end, let's say, a quarter note early. So let me go put that end note in first. We're going to try to end on that B. And then we need to pick our start note and start time. I'm going to start at the same time. I'm a little concerned it'll be too similar to the A, but let's try it. So I'm going to start, and I'm going to pick a note in this C chord. I have C, E, and G. Well, that's pretty easy. There's a G right there. Go ahead and start with that G. And maybe what I'll do is just play that G twice, come up to the A, and end on that B. I'm going to go over and program that into Logic. Let's see how that sounds. And let's take a quick listen to that. Okay, so that was kind of a lame ending. I can't say I was real impressed with it. It didn't exactly hold my attention, but I'm going to keep it just to see what we can do with it, okay? So what we've done now, we've created a phrase, And we repeated that very similar phrase, A, and then we put in a different phrase, B here at the end. We did it in A, B format. Now we're going to try to make this phrase a little more interesting. We've relied on the synthesizer a little bit to make this one interesting, but one of the things we could do to make this pop out is start using anticipations. And that style comes mainly from African rhythmic influences. If you listen to traditional classical European music, it often started and ended at very square times on the downbeat and resolving on even numbers of measures. So the end of measure 4, the melody would end on the downbeat of the next measure, number 5 or something like that. When we listen to African music, we hear a lot more phrasing that is off the beat, not on the beat. And that creates more of a rhythmic feel to the music. So we're going to use some of that here. We're using pitch. We have our melody higher. And we're also going to use some of those techniques rhythmically. We started by doing that by not playing our melody on the downbeat here, by starting on beat 2 here. But let's not even play on all the beats. Let's start playing on the eighth notes, the off eighth notes, and starting and ending things early. What do I mean by that? Watch this. I could simply start this note, an eighth note early. Now, you're seeing 16th notes here on my grid. I can actually change that up here. Okay, so now that's coming in a little bit early there. This is a very common technique. This is called an anticipation, which means that last note is hitting a little bit early. You could actually anticipate every single note in your melody, and it sounds pretty decent. Usually, though, you want a combination of the two. Let's just listen to that first phrase. You hear it, da, 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 da. So let me try anticipating this other note here on the strong beat on the start of measure 2. That should sound pretty good too. And you'll hear now by anticipating that one, it makes this one sound more like a B, right? It sounds a little bit different. I have to decide if I wanted to use that on both. And it's starting to sound like a song, right? Just with those little bit of anticipations coming in. So think about how to anticipate notes on the eighth note. Okay, so I'm going to go through right now and just do what I hear as good anticipations, then I'll come back and play it for you. So I adjusted some of the anticipation times on the notes to make something that sounded good to me. And you'll notice I didn't change the overall phrasing. I didn't add a whole bunch of notes. What I'm doing is I'm going into the idea and trying to just tease out interest from it. I'm not trying to dump a whole bunch of stuff on it. We don't want to lose our listener in a bunch of ideas and a bunch of notes. You'll see that my notes are all quarter notes or eighth notes. That's a pretty good thing for you to be using. If you see a bunch of 16th notes in your phrases, that means you've got too many notes. Let me just play through this real quick so you can hear it. And what did I do? I changed the last note. It was going up to that B. I wanted it to come down. Now it's the same as the G here, which makes it a fairly flat melody. Okay, you see that my notes here and here are staying very much in the same range while my accompaniment part is descending. That's kind of got a cool, suspenseful sound to it that I like. I've adjusted some of the start times so they're anticipating a little bit here. You'll see especially in that last phrase. But I'm not adding a whole bunch of different notes. I'm leaving these open spaces between the phrases, and I'm sticking with the basic patterns that I drew in the first place. That pattern is what your ear is going to hear, that arch or that U or that flat. To kind of get a better idea how this is going to sound, let me just throw in a quick rhythm part. Okay, so I just grabbed a quick analog, I would say retro hip-hop sound, except for it's the same sounds that they're using now. So here we go. I can probably get away with repeating that exact same melody for the next 9 bars and hold a listener's interest. I might need to add a little build or something at measure 15 through 17, and we've talked about that previously, how to do that. I probably don't need to do a whole lot more with that melody, just the way the song is moving. That's how simple it can be. It does not need to be overly complex. One of the tricks I could use if I want to create some interest that second time around would be simply to change one of these phrases in the second half, in the second 8, right? So I've gone A, B. I go A. Now, if I changed a little something here in this A, it might be interesting, and I could do something really simple, like simply just delay that A coming in there. Let's hear how that sounds. I'm going to start from measure 9. That's all it takes. Or I could do something simple like this. Get rid of the phrase in the last one right here. There's an empty space now. That's going to be a great place to put a riser in. Let me just do that real quick. So there's a real easy way to make a melody right there. Let me do another one. I'm going to make another melody for you. Okay, to do this next melody, I'm going to draw a shape. And what I'm going to do in this melody is I'm going to actually make it late in the measure. Late, it's going to be for this melody, I'm going to make a 2-bar phrase, but it's going to be late in the 2 bars. Last time I did an arch somewhere in here. I'm going to do something later. I think what I'll do, I'm looking down there at that bass. The bass is coming down to this note, so I'm going to go up to a note right in there. I'm going to go quink. I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to do something different on the next one. And the next measure, what I'll do is there's a big open space down here, so what I'll do is I'll kind of come low like that, aim low. There's a big open space down here, so I'm going to kind of come and aim low into that big space, and then I'm going to go back to A. I'm going to try to end starting at measure 8 and 7, and then I'm going to come low again here like this. So this is going to be an A, B, A, B. Just to use the notes again, I'm going to start with on my C chord here. I've got a C, an F, and A, so I'm going to go ahead and start, on my F chord here, I'm going to have an F, A, C, so I'm going to start down here. Let's see. It wants to be in the E. That's kind of a bad start, so I'll start there. I'll start on the F. I'm going to bring my line up just a little bit then to match that. And I know I'm going to target up here at a C, E, or G. Why don't I aim for all the way up for that C? So we're going to stretch it out just a little bit, okay? And my phrasing is going to be something pretty similar to this. Some notes in there. And then I'm going to come in. You'll see I'm going to come in a little early here. This is a C, E, G chord, so I'm on an E right there. That's great. I'm going to come down to a D, and then it's a G, B, D chord. So I'm going to try to get down all the way to this B here. This B right here. Okay, and then I'm going to go over here, and basically A is going to be exactly the same. Okay, so I've got my basic shapes for my chords like there. It's almost like taking a paintbrush and just splashing it across there. I'm going to transition that over to Logic now. Okay, so I brought that over into Logic, and you can see that I've only used 3 notes for each one. What I probably will do is fill in a few more notes there once I listen to it. But it wasn't that easy. I didn't work very hard. And you can almost hear how you're ready to go something else there, right? Measure 9, probably want to do something else because what your ear is going to hear this as a big A, and now it wants probably a B there. If you do the exact same thing again here, it's definitely going to want something different there. The idea of these phrase maps, these A, B patterns is that they can be for 2 bars or 4 bars or 8 bars or even 16 bars when we start looking at songs, obviously. Now, before I start messing with notes again, I'm going to go find a different synthesizer sound. Okay, so I found a sound that's a little different, doesn't have as much interest as. Which might allow me to put a few more notes in because the synthesizer isn't holding the interest now, the notes are. You can't have a whole bunch of notes and a whole bunch of activity in the synthesizer. So I tried to find one that was kind of nasal and simple, okay? So let me see if I can now then kind of keep the idea of this phrase here, but add maybe a note or 2. Now remember in these instructions, we're going to try to stay on white notes here, but I'm just going to throw a couple notes in and some anticipations in. Let's see how that sounds, and I'll play it back for you in a second. Okay, so just to show you real quick what I did there is I added a couple what are called neighboring tones right here and here, which means I was originally playing just this note, but now I'm going to play the note right next to it, da 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 da, and here I played a neighboring tone here, so it's adding just a little bit here and a little bit here. You see that? Okay, and then I think I anticipated this note a little bit, but I like the idea of coming in on the downbeat here. I thought it sounded pretty good with these pickup. These are called pickup notes leading into that downbeat neighboring tones. Let's take a listen to that. And I shortened that last note. I think there's some things I could do with that that would be interesting. Okay. So I've got my A phrase, my B phrase. I can now copy. Let me see. Now I can now just copy that over. See it with my accompaniment part. I want to get to measure 9 now here, and it is probably fine to repeat this, just like this. But for interest, I'm going to change a little something the second time through. So I'm going to go A, B, and then I think I might just change this A a little bit or this B a little bit. In fact, let me make this B into like a B prime or C. Now, I don't want to change it like crazy. I don't want this to sound completely different because I want to save myself interest at measure 17. Let me see if I could do that now by just adding a little bit more change to that. Okay. I'm building subtly. If I start making radical changes in that first 5 bars or first 4 bars or first 8 bars, I'm not leaving myself any room when I get to measure 16. Does that make sense? I hope so, because you can't answer me. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to change just a little bit more here. Okay, here's where I ended up with that melody using some of the techniques we've been talking about. So I started out with this phrase here. I added these neighboring tones, which we'll get into later, but hopefully you can just kind of feel your way through that. I've still just got those 3 main notes there, and then these 3 main notes coming down here, right? Pretty much did the exact same thing here, but added a couple little notes at the end for interest. You can either add or delete notes at the end. That's the easiest, cheapest way to make something sound like a different phrase. Then when I came back to A here, it sounded a little too repetitive. So all I did was hit this first note twice quickly there. You see that? I got 2 eighth notes. Okay. And then I come down and come to these 2 notes, but instead of going down to the B here, I just leave it blank. And I grabbed this because I heard a da-da-da, da-da-da kind of repeated. I drug it over and just used the first 2 notes of that, so it kind of hovers there. So this is leaving interest right here because you're used to it going down to that B and it doesn't. And by me not going down to the B here, I almost make this whole section between 9 and 13 different from section 1 through 5 and 5 through 9. And in fact, what you start to hear at this point is this becomes A, all of this becomes A, this becomes A, and this starts to become a B almost because I'm not resolving it in the same way that I was before. But I save that resolution for the last time here. Now this becomes almost a C, but kind of like a B because I end up resolving that last note. That last note is something we're expecting to hear, and I don't resolve it until here. You'll see that instead of going up to the A here, I picked other notes to go to that I thought sounded pretty good. And I'm on the chord C, E, G here, and the notes that I picked were C and E. Let's hear how this whole thing sounds. Okay, so there's a second melody that you can throw over the top. There is one important note here. This A note that I was playing is not actually in the chord that it's above here. It's not in this C chord. We were just running out of room here. I could have had it end on the A or maybe the B. It wasn't quite getting up to the C. I didn't like the idea of it staying here. I might have gone all the way up there, which would have looked something maybe more like this. But it's okay if it sounds good to have 1 or 2 notes that aren't in your chords down below, okay? And this A actually kind of works there. Your ear will have to tell you at some point. We can't come up with a mathematical equation forever. So let's go back and listen to that first melody again. Melody 2. Okay, I could go do 5 or 6 more of these melodies, but I'm hoping you have the basic idea. We're going to start by drawing those shapes in over our chord progression, translating those shapes over here into notes, and then making decisions on how we're going to pattern our phrases. Are we going to repeat phrases, or are we going to start changing them over time? Let's see if you can do it.